most common word in English. For example, the parrot is flying home. But we must ask, why? Why is the most common word in English? And the answer is because. In English, we use articles a lot. So let's look at how to use and how to not use definite and indefinite articles. The is actually the definite article, but first of all, we're going to look at the indefinite article. We've seen this before, because, and in the middle of because is a, and a is the indefinite article, or a. We also, of course, use an, and I think we should explain that in the first place. So, we only use an when the indefinite article goes before a vowel sound. Let me explain that. So we say a dog. The word dog begins with d, which is a consonant sound. So we use the indefinite article a dog. A crisis. Crisis starts with a k, a consonant sound. A crisis. And then we have a rather unusual musical instrument, a xylophone. A xylophone starts with a z, which is a consonant sound. But if something starts with a vowel sound, we use an. An apple. An apple. Apple starts with the vowel sound a. Or we might have an opinion. An opinion. Or we might have an X. Now this is a bit strange. The letter X is of course a consonant. But when we say it out loud, it starts with the vowel sound X. So we might use the sentence, the word xylophone begins with an X. And when we say X, we begin with E. So the important thing is that it's actually the sound, not the letter. Let me explain what I mean by that. We would say, for example, a union. The word union begins with a vowel, the vowel U. But when we say it, it begins with a consonant sound, y, union, a union. So we use the a indefinite article. But the word our, it begins with a consonant H. But when we listen to it, we don't say the H, we say ow, our. So we use an hour. Even though the word begins with a consonant, the sound is a vowel sound. So that's the most important thing to remember. When a word starts with a consonant sound, use a, and only when it starts with a vowel sound, use an. And don't worry about the actual letter it begins with, worry about the sound it begins with. Okay, so that's a and an. So the big question is, when do we use the indefinite article? But in fact, it's probably more important to begin by understanding when do we not use the indefinite article. So the answer to that is we don't use the indefinite article with plural nouns. So let me give you an example. We would say, I ate a cherry yesterday, if we ate one cherry. That's possible, but it's quite unlikely. We tend to eat cherries in 3 or 4 or 5 or 10, depending how hungry we are. So we could say I ate a cherry yesterday, but we would normally say I ate cherries yesterday. And when we use the plural noun cherries, we do not use the indefinite article. Okay, so we use a with a singular noun, but not with a plural noun like cherries. What we could also do, of course, is say something like, I ate some cherries yesterday, and not quantify any cherries we ate. And we'll look a little bit quantify a little later. So we don't use it with plural nouns, and we don't use it with uncountable nouns. So for example, here we have a sentence, I like clothing, which is loose and comfortable. Clothing is an uncountable noun. I'm going to put in a word of caution here. Be careful with uncountable nouns. In general, there's a lot of nouns out there which we may think of as uncountable, but which we actually use frequently in a countable sense. So what we're actually saying here is we don't use the indefinite article when we're using nouns in the uncountable sense. And I'll explain that a little again later on. Now, so when do we use the indefinite article? We don't use it with plurals. We don't use it with uncountable nouns. Well, we use a or an, the indefinite article, when we mention something for the first time. So let's have a look at that. I just saw a parrot flying by. I just saw a parrot flying by. This is the first time we've mentioned the parrot. We've seen the parrot before, but this is the first time we've mentioned the parrot. So we say, I just saw a parrot flying by. We could say, I am going for a walk. We might go for a walk every day. We might walk regularly. But this is the first time we're talking about this particular walk. So we say, I am going for a walk. Or we might say a longer sentence, something like, that badly parked car is in an awkward spot. Now, the interesting thing here is the noun is spot, and that begins with a consonant. But what we've actually created here is what we call a noun phrase. Awkward is an adjective, an awkward spot. Awkward spot is a noun phrase. The noun phrase begins with the vowel sound o, awkward. So we use an. That badly parked car is in an awkward spot. That badly parked car is in an awkward spot. So that's when we use an, a, or an, is when we mention something for the first time. We also use it when someone or something is a member of a group. So let's explain that. We might say, for example, I was a Boy Scout when I was young. The Scouting movement is a huge worldwide organization. And if you were a member of it, you would always say, I was a Boy Scout when I was young, a member of a group. This is an oak tree. Oak begins with the vowel sound O, so we use an. But oak is part of the group. First of all, it's part of the group of trees, and then it's part of the group of oak trees. So we would always say, this is an oak tree, because it's something which is a member of a group. The next one is, he is a musician. Now, he might actually be a member of a group, of a pop group, of a musical group. It doesn't really matter. He is a member of a group. He's a member of a group of musicians. So he is a musician. He is a musician. And then the last one, the musician might be his job, or it might be a hobby, but you use this also for people when we're talking about their jobs. So my mother used to be a nurse. She is a member of the group of nurses. So we use a or an when someone or something is a member of a group. And then the third one is, and we mentioned this a little bit earlier, we use the indefinite article a or an when you want to quantify something. So I had an apple for my lunch. We use a or an to quantify one. You could say I had the apple or the apples for my lunch, or we could say I had apples for my lunch. If you say I had an apple for my lunch, you mean you had one apple. We wouldn't normally say I had one apple for my lunch. We would normally say I had an apple for my lunch. You could say I had one apple for my lunch if you were trying to explain where all the apples had disappeared to, and you were saying it wasn't me, I had one apple for my lunch. But normally we say I had an apple for my lunch, but we can also say things like there are a lot of oak trees in the park, or there was a little food left after the party. So we can use that kind of phrase with the indefinite article to quantify something, but to quantify it in a non-specific way. A lot or a little, a bit, a huge amount, it doesn't matter. We use the indefinite article when trying to quantify in this uh, non-specific way. So, in summary, we use an when we mention something for the first time, but only if it is a countable noun and it is singular, not plural. Or we use it when we want to indicate that a thing or person, again singular, is part of a group, including jobs, sports, types of tree, for example. And we use a or an when we want to indicate a quantity of one or of a non-specific amount. So we can say an apple, meaning one, or a lot, a few, a bit, something like that, to indicate a non-specific amount that we want to talk about in a sentence where we use the indefinite article in this way. So that's it. That's the indefinite article. Now we'll move on to talk about the definite article. So now we're going to talk about the definite article, the, which is where we started from. Now, when do we use the definite article? This is a little bit more complicated. There are 4 rules, but they're all interconnected. So rule 1 is use the when you're talking about someone or something which you have already mentioned or which people can be expected to know about or understand from the context. So let's have a look. Here we have a bit of a conversation about buying a pair of shoes. The first sentence says, I bought a new pair of shoes yesterday. So that's an introductory sentence that uses the indefinite article because this is the first time we've heard about this pair of shoes. It's the first mention of the shoes. But it's the second sentence that we're interested in. Can you believe the shoes were 50% off in the sale? So the first the there means the shoes I bought yesterday. So here we use the definite article the to talk about the shoes that we introduced in the first sentence. Now, at the end of that sentence, there's another the. Can you believe the shoes were 50% off in the sale? Do we know about the sale? Has he mentioned the sale before? No. But here's the point. It says above, if you look at it, things we can expect you to know about or understand from the context. So for example, if you go and buy a pair of shoes for 50% off, you can pretty well believe that there was some kind of sale going on. So we don't need to talk about the sale. We assume that you understand that there was a sale going on. That's why we got the shoes for 50% discount. So we use the first the because we've mentioned the shoes already, and we use the second the sale, because that explains why the shoes were 50% off, and you're expected to understand that that is at least a possibility. Let's look at the next sentence. The shoes were 50% off in the sale at the mall. So the shoes were 50% off. We've introduced the shoes in the first sentence. The sale is something that we understand because if you buy shoes for 50% discount, there's probably a sale going on. And then the last bit says at the mall. So what is the status of at the mall? Well, that brings us to the second rule. Use the when there is only one of someone or something, or when it is not important which particular thing or person you are referring to. So if we look at the same sentence again, the shoes are 50% off in the sale at the mall. Well, in this case, there's probably only one mall which is the likely place where we bought these shoes. You're expected to understand that if we say the mall, you know the mall that we're talking about, the local mall, the big mall. If we're actually buying these shoes somewhere unusual, still in a mall, but not the local mall, then we would say something like, they were 50% off in the sale at the Burlington Mall, or the mall on the other side of town, or the mall up beside the university. We would define the mall. But if you don't define the mall, you mean the local one. There's only one of something. There is a local mall, and that is what we're talking about. So once again, this is part of the context, and we're talking about the mall because it's one thing, and you know which mall we're talking about. Now, we could also say, for example, I went walking in the park. Which park? We don't need to specify. If we say the park, we mean the local park. You will understand which park we're talking about because we just say the park. If we wanted to talk about a different park, we would define which park we are talking about. To say the park means the local park, the park that you think that we'll be walking in. And similarly, we could say something like, I went jogging in the countryside. This one is where the question of whether it's important or not to understand is part of this. We went jogging in the countryside. I went jogging in the countryside. That's fine. It doesn't matter where I went jogging. I just went jogging outside the city or outside the town. It could be anywhere. I was jogging in the countryside. I don't need to be specific about where it was, and you don't need to know exactly where it was I went jogging. The last one is a bit of an interesting one. This is a very common phrase in English. I'm going to the doctors, or I'm going to the dentist, or I'm going to the lawyers. The thing is, the important information here is not that we're going to see a doctor. It's just that we're going to see the doctor for some medical advice or some medical assistance. It doesn't matter which doctor we're going to see. We don't have to tell you which doctor we're actually going to go and see. We're telling you, more importantly, I'm going to seek some medical advice or medical assistance. I'm going to the doctors. So that's where a case where it's unimportant which doctor we're going to see. You just have to know that we're going to go and see a doctor for some medical help. Okay. Rule 3 is kind of an extension to this. We said that was something which is just one of a kind. It's the same here. We use the when talking about something which is unique. Unique means there's just one of them. So unique such as people, titles, places, some proper names for geographical features, and some countries which have a plural form. We'll explain that in just a moment. So we would say the president, the CEO of Apple, the Queen, because there's only one of these. There's only one president, President Trump, the CEO of Apple, Tim, and the Queen, our current Queen here in the UK. The last one here is the Smiths. That's a fairly unusual one. Instead of saying, here is Mr. and Mrs. Smith and their 3 children, John, Tom, and Mabel, we actually just say, oh, here are the Smiths. So we use the Smiths to mean the whole group. It's back to being a member of a group, but we call them the Smiths, the Smith family. Now, we also say, talking about geographical features, well, I'm not sure that the sun is a geographical feature, but we only have one sun, we only have one moon, so again, it's unique, so we just call it the sun, the moon. But it's the same with, for example, mountains, the Himalayas, the Andes, the Rockies, or the Nile, the Amazon, the Mississippi, or the Atlantic, the Pacific. We call these big, noticeable, unique features using just their name and the definite article, the. And then we mentioned the thing about countries. Most countries, we'll see this later on, most countries, we don't use the definite article, so we just say Germany or France or Italy. But with some of them, where they have a plural form, we do use the definite article the. So for example, you might say, I'm going to America. That's one way of doing it. But if you say, I'm going to the United States of America, you have to use the definite article because United States is a plural form. So you might say, I'm going to the United States of America, or you might say, I'm going to the United States, or you might say, I'm going to the US. We can use America on its own, but when we use the United States or the US, we always use the definite article because it's a plural form. Same with the Netherlands, Holland, to the rest of us. Lands itself is a plural form, so we would always use the Netherlands. The United Kingdom, it's united. There's actually 6 different parts of the United Kingdom, so we call it the United Kingdom or the UK. So the 2 short forms, the US and the UK, follow the same pattern. And we need to be a little bit cautious about that kind of thing. These are acronyms. So the acronym for the European Union is the EU. And again, we say the European Union and the EU. But for example, with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, we say the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. But when we turn it into an acronym, NATO, NATO, we don't use the definite article. It becomes simply NATO. NATO did this. I'm going to see someone from NATO. We don't use the definite article. So you need to be a little bit cautious when using acronyms. And then the 4th rule is we use the when using superlatives and ordinal numbers. Let's talk about superlatives. I'm sure you understand all of these: the biggest, the best, the fastest, the ugliest. This is just another way of saying this means there's only one of them. So for example, we might say a big man, a bigger man, but there is only one biggest man. So we say a big man because there might be lots of big men. A bigger man, there might be lots of bigger men, but there is only one biggest man. So we call him the biggest man because there's only one. So it's the same theme all the way through. You might also say something like, he was the ugliest boy in the school. Again, the ugliest means there's only one of them. He was the ugliest. And we say in the whole school. Now, again, we use the here. We haven't mentioned the school before. We certainly haven't mentioned the whole school before, but that's what we're talking about. We can assume the whole school because we understand that we're talking about a guy during his educational period, a boy, not a man. Okay, so that's why we could say the whole school, even though we've not said a whole school or a school before. We can assume this from the context. And let's talk about ordinal numbers. Cardinal numbers, of course, are just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ordinal numbers are the 1st, the 2nd, the 15th. And so the rule is, whenever you use an ordinal number before a noun, we would normally use the definite article the. Now here I've introduced a little bit of new vocabulary for you. For the umpteenth time, will you please go to sleep? That means that I've told you to go to sleep, or I've asked you to go to sleep many times before. I haven't counted exactly how often I've told you. So I'm not going to say for the 12th time or the 13th time or the 14th time. I'm going to say for the umpteenth time. It's an indefinite amount, but it's a lot. I've asked you to go to sleep a lot and you're still awake. So for the umpteenth time, we're using the ordinal number before the noun time. So we use the definite article the. For the umpteenth time, will you please go to sleep? Okay, one last thing before we leave the definite article, we need to think about the pronunciation of the. Now, you may think, what's he talking about? Let's have a look at it. We saw earlier on that when the indefinite article precedes a consonant sound, we use a, and when it precedes a vowel sound, we use an. It's the same kind of thing with the definite article. With a consonant sound like p for president, we say the president, the. It's a very short sound, the president. But if we are talking about a noun that starts with a vowel sound, again, apple, we say the apple, the apple. So it's the president or the apple. I'm kind of exaggerating a little bit there. The president, the apple. The president, the apple. The president, the apple. You have to listen very closely to it, but there is a difference between the way We pronounce the when it's before a consonant sound and the before a vowel sound, the apple, the apple, the, the. There's another problem that we have to be aware of because sometimes we use the definite article purely for emphasis. Let me give you an example. So say Donald Trump is about to turn up and you say, here comes the president, then I might say, what, the president? The president? I'm using the form the, even though it starts with a consonant sound, president, p. The president? It's an emphasis. Usually when asking a question, is it the president? Now, it's exactly the same pronunciation as the apple, but it's much longer and stronger. We use it with much more force. So that's why I've written it in capital letters with a capital the. What, the president? It's the same sound as the apple, it's just longer and stronger. And we use that when we want to emphasize, and we use the whether or not it's a consonant sound or a vowel sound. If we're using it for emphasis, it doesn't matter, we use the president. Something to think about. The, and the, that's the way we use it. So that's it for the definite article. Just to summarize, use the when you're talking about someone or something which you've already mentioned, or which people can be expected to know about or understand from the context. Or use the when there is only one of something, someone, or one of something, or when it's not important which thing or person you're referring to. And in the same kind of theme, use the when talking about something unique, when there's only one of something, like a geographical feature, or when you're talking about superlatives. And once again, ordinal numbers, we use it when we use an ordinal number before a noun, we normally use the definite article. So that's it for definite articles. Now we're going to move on and have a look at this a little bit more, because at the bottom here, you'll see the North Atlantic Treaty Organization becomes simply NATO and uses the zero article. So in the next video, we'll talk about zero article. So now we're going to talk about the zero article. Right at the beginning of the first video, we saw a slide that says, let's look at how to use and how to not use definite and indefinite articles. Normally in English, we would say how not to use, but here I specifically said and how to not use, because what we quite often do in English is instead of putting in either a definite or an indefinite article, we put in zero articles where there is no article before the noun. And that's a very important part of how we construct English. So we're not using definite or indefinite articles. So that's why I left it as and how to not use definite and indefinite articles, to omit them completely. And that's really what the zero article is all about. In English grammar, knowing when not to use a definite or indefinite article is much trickier and much more important than knowing how and when to use them. When you're using a or an and the, then it's important in terms of getting the structure right and everything else, but by and large, it doesn't change the meaning of a sentence too much. So people will understand what you're trying to say, just that you're struggling with the articles. But with the zero article, it's a bit more complicated. If you put in an article when it's not needed, when we would never use it, when we would use the zero article option, that's when it can get confusing. So you have to really think as much as you can about when you need to use the indefinite article, when you need to use the definite article, and when you need to use no article at all, the zero article. So my recommendation is pay particular attention to this next bit. In English grammar, zero article refers to the occasions in speech or writing where a noun or noun phrase is not preceded by an article. So whenever you see a noun or a noun phrase and there is no a, an, or the before it, That's an example of the zero article. In general, we don't use an article with proper nouns or with uncountable nouns or plural countable nouns where the reference is non-specific. Those are kind of the outline, the general terms, and I'll explain those in much more detail. But knowing when not to use any article can actually be very difficult. It's pretty complicated. So, for example, in general, no article is used when referring to means of transport. We can go by plane or by car or by train. And we don't use the articles very often, for example, in the expression of time, at midnight or on time. But equally, we say, I'm going to take the train, or can you give me the time of day? So with articles, and particularly with the zero article, we have many rules, but there are also many exceptions. So it's not straightforward. There's actually 8 rules here that we have to think about when we use the zero article. This is the complicated bit. Definite and indefinite, I think, are pretty straightforward. It's when we decide not to use an article at all, the zero article option, that we need to really start thinking. So let's look at it. The first rule is we use no article when talking about things in a very general sense. So for example, we might say, I love watching whales. There's no article in there because we're talking about any whales anywhere. We're not talking about the whale over there. We're not talking about the whales that we might see off the coast here. We're talking about whales in general, whales worldwide. So we don't use an article. Same kind of thing, I fell asleep counting sheep. These are imaginary sheep. We don't care about the sheep. We're actually just trying to get to sleep. So these are general sheep. They're not specific sheep. We're not counting a flock of sheep. We're not talking about the sheep on the hill. We're just talking about sheep, imaginary sheep. We don't use an article. We use the zero article option. We mentioned earlier on about countries. When countries take the plural form, we do use an article. The United States, the United Kingdom, the Philippines, that kind of thing, the Netherlands. But for most countries, we use the zero article option. He's from Germany. He's German. He speaks German. We don't use an article. I love Italy and I can speak Italian. We don't use it for the country or for the language. So we would say, have you ever visited Algeria? Zero article. Or we could say, I love listening to people talking Japanese. So we don't use any article when talking about most countries and languages. And then here's 3 more rules. We use the zero article option when talking about meals or when talking about specific mountains, lakes, or islands, and most cities, streets, and airports. So let's have a look at these. Talking about meals, let's have breakfast. Breakfast is a noun, but normally we have no article connected with it. We have the zero article option. You could say, I enjoyed the breakfast. If you were at a hotel, say, the hotel wasn't very good, but I enjoyed the breakfast, meaning a specific thing. But in general, we just say breakfast. Let's have breakfast. We don't use any article. Same with dinner. Time for dinner. We don't use an article in that kind of sense. And it's the same if we're talking about a particular mountain or lake or island or something like that. There's Mount Fuji. I love Mont Blanc. Lake Superior is very large. Everest is the biggest mountain in the world. Madagascar is a beautiful island. We have zero articles with that kind of proper name, proper noun. You notice these all begin with capitals, so they're all proper nouns. We don't, by and large, use the zero article. And it's the same with places that we might be familiar with. Kiev, New York, Main Street, Heathrow, Peebles, which is a small town in Scotland where I come from. Actually, the interesting one here is the middle one, Main Street. It's capitalized, so Main Street is a proper noun. It's the name of the street. This is Main Street. However, most American cities or most American towns have what we would call a main street. We don't know what the name of it is. It's just the main area where most of the traffic is, where most of the people are, where most of the bars and restaurants and businesses are. That would be a small m, and in that case we would say, let's go down to the main street. So we say, let's go down to Main Street when it's called Main Street. Or we could say, let's go down to the main street when we're talking about the road that goes through the town where most of the people and the businesses are. Just a slight difference there to be aware of. And then here are the last three rules for using the zero article. First of all, we use no article when using possessive. We use no article when using nouns in an uncountable sense. We mentioned this before. And also, we have the zero article option when talking about people's names and titles. So let's have a look at these. When we're using possessives, we would say, where's my coat? We could say, where's the coat? But if we're using the possessive, where's my coat? We don't need any other word. We don't need an article. The possessive takes over. Where's my coat? She enjoyed her day out. Now you could say she enjoyed a day out, she enjoyed the day out, but when we use the possessive, her, we don't need any of those. She enjoyed her day out. Rule 7, we use the zero article option when we're talking about, when we're using nouns, in an uncountable sense. So I love adding milk. Milk here is used in its uncountable sense, so we have no article. I love adding milk to my coffee. Coffee here is also uncountable, but it's also accompanied by a possessive. So we don't need an article there because it's the article is replaced by my. I love adding milk. We don't need the article to my coffee. The possessive my means we don't need the article before coffee. And then the last one is we use the zero article option when talking about people's names and titles. So we would say, this is the president, or the president, depending how we look at it. But if we include his name, we would always just say, this is President Trump. So we don't use an article when we're talking about a specific name or a specific title. Same here with the second sentence in number 8. She is lady in waiting. That's a job title. She is lady in waiting. It doesn't require an article. It's a zero article option. She is lady in waiting to Queen Elizabeth. Queen Elizabeth, again, title, same as President Trump. It doesn't need an article because it's a person's name and title. And that's it. That's when we decide not to use an article and select the zero article option. So there's 8 different rules there, and we have to kind of think about them all. And that's why it can get quite complicated. But mastering the zero option is actually key to using articles correctly when using English. Anyway, just to sum up, the indefinite article is a when we use a consonant sound and when we use a vowel sound. The definite article is the, which is the with a consonant sound and the with a vowel sound. So again, remember, consonant sound and vowel sound does change both the articles, both indefinite and definite. But as far as the zero article is concerned, it doesn't matter because there is no article. We don't care how it sounds, it's just not there. But getting the zero article option right, that is the tricky bit. So what I recommend is that you guys all test yourself a little bit. I've had a good look online, and so what I suggest you do is you go to this website, speakconfidentenglish.com/articles, and test yourself. Test yourself on your ability to use definite and indefinite articles, and also, of course, to use the zero article option. That's the bit that we really need to work on. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed these videos, and I'll see you again soon.